Hey, how you doing? You doing okay? I hope so. Today we're going to do something a little bit different on the channel. Not a review, but more of just some thoughts. Just some thoughts about Andor and the future of Star Wars. I think most people will agree that Andor was a pretty good show. In fact, Empire put out their top 20 shows of the year, and Andor was number one. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's a good show. I mean, I think so. But is it a good Star Wars show? Now, I want to give you a bit of background, okay? I mean, for those of you who've been around the channel, you know most of this, but the fact is, I've grown up with Star Wars. My first memory was the probe droids coming out of the Star Destroyer in The Empire Strikes Back. It's my first memory. I was 4 years old when that movie came out, and it's the first thing that I can remember. So, yeah, I've been sort of destined, fated, uh, almost cursed in a way to be a Star Wars fan forever. But yeah, Star Wars has always been a part of my life, so it's always meant a whole lot to me. I love most of the movies. Um, and yeah, it's been there. It's been a constant throughout my whole life. Now, when it comes to Andor, really you've got to look at Rogue One first. And to be perfectly clear and honest with you, Rogue One is toward the bottom for me as far as Star Wars movies go. Now, most Star Wars movies, well, let's just keep it there. But most Star Wars movies to me are better than most other movies out there. Like period. Like Star Wars is in the top echelon of some of my favorite movies to watch. But of those, Rogue One was always toward the bottom for me. And it's because at the time I had said, yeah, it just doesn't interest me. The characters didn't grab me, and I prefer stories told, with the Jedi and the Sith and all that kind of stuff. And I have to take that back. It really isn't about that because Andor proved me wrong about that. Andor is the same kind of story. Has nothing to do with the Jedi or the Sith. It's just the normal everyday people living in the galaxy. The difference is it's just story well told. And I think Rogue One had some storytelling issues and even some character building issues that kept me from really getting into it and loving it as much as I've loved Andor. Now, again, I think Andor is probably, almost almost certainly the best live action Star Wars content that we've gotten since the original trilogy. I think it's the best acted. I think it's the best told story, story wise. I think the way that it looks, the way that it feels, everything about it screams Star Wars to me. But there's a lot of people that disagree with that. There's a lot of people that I've said, I mean, Reddit posts that say that Star Wars is not a good Star Wars show. And it's really what got me thinking about this ever since I read that post toward the beginning of the run of Andor. Before you start talking about Andor, I guess you really have to talk about what Star Wars is. Like what makes Star Wars what it is. What is the defining characteristics of a good Star Wars story? Now, I have been always a George Lucas purist, right? I mean, it's like anything that he has said, that is canon. That is the end all be all, was always what George Lucas said. And it's kind of followed me throughout sort of my judging of Star Wars content. Like, is this something that I think George Lucas would have approved of? I mean, that's kind of open to interpretation, right? I can't just call up George and say, hey, sir, George, what did you think of The Mandalorian season 2? I can't do that. But what I can do is look at some of the things that he said himself. Now, he said many, many times in different interviews, different books, all those sorts of things that Star Wars was, originally kind of the concept of it was to be like the old serials back in the 30s and 40s, like Flash Gordon, things like that, where morals are sort of wrapped up in these stories to teach to young people. This is what he said. It's not just about the Force, it's about the balance of the Force. There's always going to be good, there's always going to be evil. It's when one gets out of sync, when there's too much of one, that the other side has to bring it back. I would say today the evil side is getting unbalanced. I don't know what cycle we are working with, but I would say the last time it was so unbalanced was during World War II, and it got back in balance again during the 40s and 50s. And then you could see the start of the growth of the forces of evil during the Vietnam War. Now the forces of evil are getting very serious, but something will come to balance it all out. Things do balance themselves out. Trust your feelings. Do what you can. Everyone must apply themselves to the good side of the force, be compassionate, let go of their greed and their possessiveness, help other people, help us to make a better world out of this. Try and make it so we can migrate and adapt, and use your brain. Anything you do that makes you use your brain is a good thing. Now, I think after George Lucas sold Disney to Star Wars, and even really before then, Dave Filoni was sort of the heir apparent to the Star Wars kingdom as far as the way that Star Wars was going to move forward. This is what he had to say. It's not about X-Wings. It's not about all the things we decorate Star Wars in. It's important. It's part of the genius of it. But we soulfully react. Like, we don't just want an action movie. We want to feel uplifted. And Star Wars is an adventure that makes you feel good, you know? It makes me feel like, wow, I want to be a part of that. So that's what I always go back to with Star Wars, is this selfless act and this family dynamic, which is so important to George, so important to the foundation of Star Wars. That's in us. And what I like about it is really saying there's a lot of hope out there, that we fundamentally want to be good people, that we can all be driven to do terrible things, but we can persevere through selfless action. So George has this hopeful story, and it's something that he's reiterated most times I've seen him, after we've been making things without him, is remember to make these stories hopeful. Remember to give that to kids because they really need it. Now, this selfless act that Dave Filoni is talking about is this sort of this thing that he said at the end of one of the gallery episodes, the making of the Mandalorian, where he's talking about the through line from the Phantom Menace all the way to Return of the Jedi. And he's talking about Vader basically giving up all the power in the universe to save his son. And that's one of those things that's just, it's a really powerful thing. And to hear that from somebody who, like I said, has basically been George Lucas's handpicked heir to the throne of Star Wars, and I guess you could say the holocron of all the information in Star Wars kind of thing. Look, it's Dave Filoni is kind of an amazing storyteller, and it's cool to hear this from his point of view. And I really would like to hear more from him about stuff like that. Now, back to Andor. I think one of the things that's really interesting about Andor is the idea that we're taking all of these different points of view, but they're all pushing this one character to do something that's changing him. It's his character is going through this change through the whole season. And of course, he's going to go through further changes in the next season. There's only going to be 2. So it's really, really interesting to see how all of these different characters are molding what is going to be this character that we're going to meet and follow the rest of his journey in Rogue One. I'd say in defining his character, there are really two characters in this show that are either going to, mold him even further, and that's Mon Mothma and Luthen Rael. Now, we know as Star Wars fans that Mon Mothma goes to become the head of the Rebel Alliance, right? The leader. And she is going through a lot of changes in this season and in this show. And it's really, really interesting to see how many sacrifices she is having to make throughout to make sure that the Rebel Alliance moves forward, in this time of where the Alliance really is not showing themselves. It's the beginning of the Rebel Alliance. That's really, really interesting to see. And then we have Luthen Rael, and he sacrifices in a much different way. But he is being shown as this person behind the scenes that's really making all these things happen to disrupt the Empire. And most famously in this series so far is his scene where he's describing what he's had to sacrifice his own soul for the Alliance to be what it is. And it's an incredibly well acted, well written scene that I need to rewatch many, many times. It's just so good. I think we're gonna see not only Luthen Rael rub off on Andor, but I think some of the ideals that Andor has picked up along the way so far, they're going to eventually rub off on Luthen Rael. Of course, we don't know where Luthen Rael's story ends, but it is going to be interesting to see that play out. Another major character in this, at least this first season, was the character of Kino Loy, played by Andy Serkis. His character in the prison is definitely one of, I guess you could say, in a selfish sort of position, in a position of relative comfort in the prison because he's, I guess, the leader of the prisoners. So in at least on this level. So it's interesting to see this dynamic between him and Andor, and how Andor convinces him of what needs to be done, and his speech to the prison is really affecting, and it'll be interesting to see if they bring him back in any sort of way. We haven't seen the end of him, at least not that I can. I mean, I would think that yeah, he's gonna show up eventually, right? He's got to, right? We see a lot of similarities between all these characters that have been introduced to us, and it comes down to sacrifice, in my opinion. It's also this difference between being selfless and being selfish, right? Kino Loy starts out very selfish and ends up being very selfless. Andor himself goes from very selfish at the beginning of this season to being very selfless at the end of the season. And of course, I think we're going to see a lot of that stuff continue into the second season. Andor himself is an incredibly impressive character, and incredibly deep, that I didn't feel when I was watching Rogue One. But now that I'm seeing sort of a little bit of the bigger picture, we haven't seen the season 2 yet, but it's very interesting to see how he's going to change and grow all the way up until I guess the beginning of Rogue One. So to me, a lot of the thematic moments in this show are inherently Star Wars. There's a lot there to chew on if you're a Star Wars fan. I mean, I can kind of see where some people are coming from, especially if you're not connecting with the show. By no means am I saying that if you don't like this show, then you can't be a Star Wars fan, or whatever. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just trying to say that to me, this was why this was definitely a good Star Wars show. Something that I want to continue to watch over and over and over. It's just one of those that it has a lot of deeper meanings, and I really enjoyed the pace. I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the look and feel of the world. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm hoping that other people are enjoying it as much as I am. You could definitely say that Andor doesn't follow that typical Star Wars formula, and I think a lot of people feel that Star Wars is different things. I think if you interviewed 100 different people and asked them, what Star Wars was to them, a lot of people would say, "Oh yeah, it's the lightsabers and the Jedi and the Sith." Some people would say, "Oh, it's the big space battles and the cool action scenes and the shootouts." And then there's going to be people that are like, "No, it's the deeper meanings, it's the, whatever." And all of those things are valid. All of those different viewpoints are valid. But even though I think this show doesn't follow any of those formulas really to a T, I think there's room for all kinds of stories to be told. I've said it before. I want a romantic comedy. I want a sitcom in the Star Wars universe. I still want a Godfather type show. That's what I was hoping Book of Boba Fett was going to be, and it really didn't turn out to be that. But I still think that could be a lot of fun to see. The rise of a crime lord, and just some of the stories that we haven't gotten to see yet. We don't have to connect everything to the Skywalkers. It can be something completely different, and that brings us to some of the more interesting shows that are coming up soon. Of course, we've got Mandalorian season 3. Yes, that's going to be a continuation of that story, which is really kind of running parallel to some of the stories that we already know. Of course, we don't know what else Luke gets up to in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, but it's going to be running alongside that. The Mandalorian is, but then we're going to have Ahsoka, and the Ahsoka series is going to be very similar as far as the timing of the show. Now, we don't really know a whole lot about it other than it's going to be about Ahsoka, and we've got Sabine in it. We've got supposedly Ezra in it. You would think that Thrawn's going to be in it. There's going to be a continuation of sort of that Rebels storyline that it was in the Rebels cartoon series. I'm excited for it, but I know it's going to be a little bit more of the same. The one that really kind of intrigues me, though, is The Acolyte. And The Acolyte is a mystery thriller that will take viewers into a galaxy of shadowy secrets and emerging dark side powers in the final days of the High Republic era. A former Padawan reunites with her Jedi Master to investigate a series of crimes, but the forces they confront are more sinister than they ever anticipated. a lot of people have been, talking about, oh, it needs to be darker. Star Wars needs to be darker. It's got to be this. And I want to rated R Star Wars and all that stuff. I don't agree with that. I don't think that violence is what makes Star Wars what it is. Of course, as I said, Star Wars means many different things to many different people. I think the video games have sort of spoiled some people into thinking that Star Wars is something that it's really not. But that's just my opinion. And of course, there's going to be people that will completely disagree with me. But I think that the Acolyte is an interesting idea. It's going to be all about that execution, though. Can it be an effective series? It sounds like it's going to be like a mystery story. And that is really kind of interesting to see if that's going to be something that's going to work. Is it a good story with a Star Wars skin? That's really kind of the way that I look at Andor. Is that, I mean, I think if you took everything out of Andor that was Star Wars related, you would still have a compelling story about the beginning of a rebellion, the beginning of the beginning stages of a revolutionary, and seeing him sort of rise up to be a powerful force in that rebellion. I think that's still an interesting story that has nothing really, it doesn't have to have a Star Wars kind of skin on it. So it's going to be interesting to see with the Acolyte if that's something that they can pull off. And of course, there's been so many different movie ideas that have floated around. Of course, Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron idea that apparently has just been shelved. Taika Waititi's movie that has apparently not really gotten any further along. I mean, we don't know. There's a lot of up in the air about that one. And then we heard that Damon Lindelof is going to be writing a new movie with the director, I guess the showrunner, I guess, of Ms. Marvel. So there's just a lot up in the air, a lot of cool things that might be happening. So I'm kind of curious for those of you who are fans of Andor. Do you think that it's a good Star Wars show? Not just a good show. Is it a good Star Wars show? And what did you think about the rest of this? Was this a bad idea? Should I have not done this? I don't know. But I wanted to get it off my chest. I wanted to talk about it. So there we are. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.